Welcome back to another game of GP Essen, and now we have Wizzerinus versus Oshni. Wizzerinus is on Mardu Tabia deck. It's a mid-range deck that uses, I guess, Serene plus a bunch of planeswalkers, and also runs the correct ratios for Tabia, what they're using as a first mate. And meanwhile, Oshni is on Molten EHS, which is a Naya spells deck. It runs all non-creature spells, as you can clearly see by the Garth that they're running as a first mate. So yeah, both decks have first mates. It'll be an interesting matchup. I think both decks are pretty high on value. Seems like Oshni has a pretty good hand. And Wizzerinus has also a really good hand because they have turn 1 pay up, turn 2 Season of War. And I guess follow up with either Sealed Riftway or Mufuna or Zareen if they draw land. And Sealed Riftway is pretty good against Oshni's deck because it uses the graveyard a lot between Performance of a Lifetime and More No More and Breach the Lilies. So both players have kept their hands and have first mated. Wizzerinus and Oshni both lead off on... Actually, Oshni leading off on a tap land is kind of interesting because unless they're planning on... Oh no, they can just fetch for one of their tri-lands. Actually, does Oshni run a tri-land? Let me check. No, don't think so. Huh. I guess they were just keeping it Void Flare in case Wizzerinus played a turn 1 creature. Does Wizzerinus have one of those? No, Wizzerinus doesn't have a turn 1 creature, so... No idea why Oshni played Timber Range untapped there then. And yeah, Wizzerinus is going to pay up and name Endless Helpless Souls, which is the main value card of Oshni's deck. And Oshni dutifully discards it because they're afraid of a 3-drop on turn 2 off the treasure off pay up. Either ways, yeah, Oshni plays turn 2 Performance. Let's see what they flip. Flip a land, that's pretty good. But it's not a fetch land or a basic, so... And it's a shock land, or a pain land, so Oshni is going to be taking quite a bit of damage from their mana base this game. Wizzerinus draws Lucian. I guess they're going to play Seasons of War out right now. I don't think Oshni has a good way to deal with Seasons of War, at least in their hand right now. So Oshni draws in the Performance. Well, they definitely want to play the land this turn because otherwise the land just goes away. And if they do that, I guess they can... White clear doesn't really hit anything, and they don't have 2 red sources, so they probably will just play Garth then. And that's probably good enough. Oh no, Oshni is going to play Performance and try to flip a second card. They get Abundant Harvest. Okay, that's really good. So they can play Shifting Glade down from their other Performance and play Abundant Harvest and get the second chapter trigger of both performances, right? Yeah. And they're probably going to name land here so they can try to flip into a land that doesn't hurt them so much. But no, they're going to look for long land. I guess they're just okay with taking 3 damage from their lands each turn. And what do they flip into? Molten Incubation. Yeah, that's not bad. So does Oshni have 2 things in yard for perform? Oh, they have EHS in yard. Yeah, so Wizzerinus is probably looking to put get down Sealed Riftway so that they can activate it in response to the 3rd chapter Performance, which will let Oshni cast a spell from the graveyard and copy it once. So now that Oshni can't really afford to activate the 3rd chapter, well, actually, something that Oshni can sort of do is intentionally not play 2 spells each turn. Just stagger out your spells so that you keep floating the 3rd chapter Performance and forcing Wizzerinus to always keep up 2 mana for Sealed Riftway. Because Wizzerinus definitely wants to drop one of their 3 or 4 drops next turn, but if they have to keep up Sealed Riftway, then they can't really do that. Like, Oshni can just play a land and play Garth here, and then hold up Void Flare next turn. Or at least Void Flare on their opponent's turn. Or no, they can't really, because they only have 1 red source. No, actually, hilariously enough, since Oshni only has 1 red source, and then a handful of red spells, they can't actually trigger the 2nd or the 3rd chapter of Performance, even if they wanted to, so somehow they've actually, whether intentionally or not, they've managed to play around Sealed Riftway by withholding the 3rd chapter of Performance. I think at this point, your best bet is just to drop down Garth and see how your opponent deals with him. You're getting whacked for 2 off your lands. Pretty painful. So I guess Wizzerinus is fetching end of turn. They're going to fetch out a Rousing Revel. And Wizzerinus draws for a turn, and, well, they're going to get a token off Seas of War and get to land for a turn. So if they want to hold up Sealed Riftway, they can't actually play anything, so I don't think they're going to hold up Sealed Riftway this turn. I think they'd rather just play Lucian this turn and kill the Garth that way. And they're going to play a Desolate Dominion tapped, so I guess they're planning on playing. No, they're just going to pass the turn holding up Sealed Riftway. So Wizzerinus is spending all this mana trying to play around performance, not knowing that Oshni can't actually trigger performance. Or I guess they can trigger performance now because they have Abundant Harvest. I think Oshni probably really wants Abundant Harvest for a land here so that they can stop shocking themselves, hopefully. No, it seems like Oshni is just going all in. They're going to start with Mystery of the Crashcraft. Is Oshni just going to play right into Sealed Riftway and just let their spells get exiled? I mean, I guess that is a way to... Yeah, it seems like Oshni is just going to make Wizzerinus crack the Sealed Riftway. I guess Oshni is just hoping to hit a red land off Abundant Harvest so that they can Void Flare and then flip the Mystery this turn. Yeah, so Wizzerinus activates Sealed Riftway, exiling Oshni's Yard in response to the third chapter of performance. So that fizzles the third chapter of performance. A big womp womp. But Garth is actually getting a lot of paralysis triggers from this too, so I mean, Oshni is definitely planning to swing with Garth this turn, and if they flip another spell off the top, that's pretty good too. So Oshni wisely naming land, hoping to hit Wayfarer's Shrine. Okay, that's a really good land, because yeah, it gets them a basic, stops the pain lands from hitting them. So they probably want to fetch a mountain here, so they can play Void Flare this turn. Actually, maybe Oshni wants to just attack with Garth first, see what's on top. At least play Wayfarer's Shrine out, attack with Garth, see what's on top. If they don't like it, they can shuffle. Or actually, maybe it doesn't work out as well as it seems like it does, because if the top spell is red, then Oshni doesn't actually have a chance to activate Wayfarer's Shrine for Mountain. Oshni won't cast, so either it's a land or it's a spell that Oshni can't cast off 2 non-red mana. And I guess we won't really know what it is because the chat doesn't really show what card Oshni saw, but if Oshni doesn't fetch with Wayfarer's Shrine, then we'll see it when they draw it. But if they do fetch with Wayfarer's Shrine, probably means it's a land, or it's a spell they couldn't cast anyways. So Wizzerinus draws another Planeswalker. So now they have a choice of what Planeswalkers to play. They play Illusion, which, yeah, makes sense. It gets rid of the Garth, and lets the soldier tokens attack in. So Oshni is going to get whacked for 4 this turn, or whacked for 1, I guess, or 2, because the soldier one of the soldier tokens has Summoning Sickness. But yeah, Illusion, -3, exiles Garth. In response, Oshni is going to fetch, get a mountain, and I guess Void Flare the Illusion. No? Yeah, that makes sense. And that actually, oh yeah, that flips Epsilon. Wizzerinus swinging with a 1/1 with melee, so that becomes a 2/2, and Oshni probably not blocking here. So Wizzerinus passes their turn. Oshni taps, and let's see, they draw another land. Yeah, Oshni doesn't have much to do right now. I guess they can Molten Incubation and then Void Flare, copy the Void Flare. Sacrificing, yeah, Epsilon, you can sacrifice 2 tokens or 2 aliens to copy one of your spells. So Oshni can Void Flare, copy Void Flare, and then that hits Wizzerinus in the face for 6. And like that is something Wizzerinus has to worry about because they are getting pinged down by Seasons of War. Although they have a bunch of life gain in hand with Amaret and Tabia lifelink. So yeah, Oshni plays Molten Incubation and probably decides to hold up Void Flare. Seasons of War makes another soldier. And Wizzerinus draws Pithwelt, which is really good right now because it kills one of Oshni's creatures. If Wizzerinus decides to Pithwelt Epsilon, Oshni can actually just Void Flare and then sack Epsilon to itself using its ability in response. Copy the Void Flare, and that would be a pretty good outcome for Oshni. Or not pretty good, because you'd rather not get your Epsilon Pithwelted, but an alright outcome for what you would have to deal with anyways. But Amaret comes down, and yeah, that thing's gonna gain Wizzerinus some life. Oshni just lets Amaret resolve. Amaret's going to shoot Epsilon. So is Oshni going to know about that trick that they can do right now? Because like there's no point in not sacking Epsilon to itself. In fact, if you sack Epsilon to itself, then it fizzles Amaret's ability, so Wizzerinus doesn't even gain the extra life. Yeah, Void Flare. Well, you're definitely pointing one of the Void Flares at Amaret, I think. And yeah, Oshni sacking Epsilon plus an alien to copy the Void Flare. Oh, they're going to point the second Void Flare at one of the soldiers, which I guess makes sense. They don't want to take too much damage. And that also puts the counter on Molten Incubation. And yeah, Wizzerinus swings in with the 2/2, and Oshni takes the 2. Wizzerinus is not going to hold a Pithwelt. Oshni doesn't have anything in hand, but if they draw something like, they didn't get it, but if they drew something like EHS. That'd be really good here because suddenly they basically kind of refills their hand in a way because they get to cast 2 spells and those spells could just give Oshni extra cards. Oshni gets Imperial Siege, decides to hold onto it because Oshni would rather keep an extra spell in case they need to trigger performance or trigger Mystery of the Crashcraft sorcery side. The Wizzerinus draws Valdez, and Oshni gets punished for not casting Imperial Siege when they drew it. Not that they would have known that Valdez was on the top anyways, so yeah. Wizzerinus is just going to activate Rousing Rebel and spring with everything. I think Oshni is kind of forced to chump block the Rousing Rebel here with their alien. But now Oshni's down to 4 life, and yeah. I don't think Oshni really has a chance here. They can top deck EHS, I guess, but no, they top deck a land instead, and yeah, I think that's the end of the game for them. Looking at sideboarding, the Wizzerinus has a lot of 1-ups in the sideboard, but the ones that are most relevant against Oshni's deck would probably be Sunder History, which kills Oshni's enchantments, Video Radiance, which prevents Oshni from recasting their spells from Yard, and Sealed Riftway, which exiles their Yard. So actually Sealed Tomb too. Sealed Tomb on maybe EHS, and then on Oshni's side, you probably want to bring in more Imperial Sieges because Wizzerinus has a pretty greedy mana base. Metal Munch sort of answers Sealed Riftway, but I feel like that's probably too low value. Event Horizon kind of deals with Wizzerinus' artifacts and enchantments, I guess. And Embodied Soul, I don't think that's really that good because Wizzerinus' removal is Pith Welts. And I don't think Tenuous Existence really hits anything, so probably just Imperial Siege. It seems like Game 2 has started, and both players have revealed their first mates. Oshni has Imperial Siege in their opening hand. I think they're going to keep this. And they're probably just going to turn 1, Journey Begins, try to look for a basic, probably. Because they kind of, like last game, they saw how much damage they took from their lands by not having a basic. Meanwhile, Wizzerinus has a hand with 2 Seasons of Wars. Huh. I mean, I think Wizzerinus is also probably keeping this. And yeah, so with Oshni keeps and decides to guard away one of their lands, and in fact it's a fetch land. It seems like Oshni just doesn't care about how much damage they're going to be taking from their lands here. And Wizzerinus, meanwhile, Tabia's away their 2nd Season of War, which I guess makes sense, because 2 Seasons of War is kind of too much. So Oshni turn 1, Journey Begins, probably looking for a land, and they decide to get an Amber Hills off the Journey. The exact card that they've garthed away, which is pretty funny. Meanwhile, Wizzerinus draws a swamp, so yeah, they have 3 lands now, and I'm not sure if they did this intentionally or not, but they left off the swamp, which allows them to play around turn 2 Imperial Siege. So I guess Oshni will just have to settle for a turn 2 Performance of a Lifetime instead, or I guess they can keep up Solar Flare, but they're probably just going to Performance, and yeah, let's see what they flip off the top. Forgotten Step. It seems like this is going to be a retread of Game 1 where Oshni is just going to take a bunch of damage from their own lands because they don't have any basics. And they're kind of forced to play Forgotten Step next turn because otherwise it just goes away forever. So there is... Ooh, they fetch a basic with their Barren Desolation. So yeah, they're definitely hard playing around Imperial Siege here. And I think that's really paying off for them because Oshni has Imperial Siege in hand right now. I think Oshni is probably just going to play Garth here. And Oshni is already down to 14 life just from their own lands. Meanwhile, Wizzerinus draws yet another basic. Wow, that's really worked out well for them because Oshni is really sad sitting there with the Imperial Siege in hand. And now that Garth is dead, Oshni doesn't really have anything else to do. They draw Metal Munch, which has... Oh, it kills one of the Solar tokens, but... I guess Oshni can Metal Munch and then Solar Flare face if they want to get the 2nd chapter Performance, but that's a really low value thing to be doing. So yeah, Wizzerinus stranding Oshni's Imperial Siege in hand means that Oshni can't really efficiently trigger Performance. And Oshni is just going to play a land and pass. They're not even going to... Well, I guess they're holding up Solar Flare, but yeah, now Wizzerinus is probably finally going to play out their Nebula, and yeah, no more basics. Wizzerinus is finally going to play out a non-basic and give Oshni an Imperial Siege target. Imperial Siege on turn 4 is way worse than Imperial Siege on turn 2. And Wizzerinus is going to play Tabia, which is going to die to Solar Flare. Pretty cleanly, in fact. Oh, Oshni is going to pass their turn. I guess they want to trigger the 2nd chapter Performance. I think they're definitely fetching for basic here. Let's have the Crashcraft. That's pretty good too. No, it seems like Oshni, yeah, they fetched a mountain off Amber Hills, which is not legal, so judge call time. Okay, seems like the judge call has been resolved, and Oshni fetches a plains instead. So yeah, and they draw a timber range. So they're probably fetching a basic this turn, so they stop taking damage from these guys. And then, I guess, to trigger performance this turn, they can play out their entire hand, actually. If Oshni plays out their entire hand, they have nothing to do next turn, and they have no way to trigger performance again. But at this point, maybe that's just what they need to do. Oh, they fetch in a way so that they don't have 2 red, or they only have 2 red, so they can't play out their entire hand now. I mean, they're definitely solar flaring the Tabia here, because otherwise Tabia just exiles the performance. So they're not going to Imperial Siege the land, which is actually a huge problem for Oshni, because now Wizzerinus gets to drop Amaret. Or actually, never mind, it didn't really matter, because Wizzerinus had an extra land in hand anyway, so yeah, they would have been able to drop Amaret either ways. But Wizzerinus drops Amaret, and Oshni doesn't really have a good way to deal with it now. If Oshni does top deck a spell though, then they can get the 3rd chapter performance and probably recast Solar Flare. Or Journey Begins would also be a decent thing to recast, because it gets them 2 cards, and hopefully those cards are enchantments that get them into more cards. So yeah, Wizzerinus +1's Amaret makes it 1/1 lifelink haste cleric, brings them for 1, plays their Barren Desolation. Actually, top deck Molten Incubation. So yeah, that's great, because now they can trigger the 2nd or the 3rd chapter of performance. And by doing that, they probably want to recast Solar Flare and copy it so that it kills Amaret. And they also get to Imperial Siege Wizzerinus' Barren Desolation, which, what lands does Wizzerinus even have in their deck, actually? Yeah, they don't have utility land that they can fetch off Barren Desolation, but still puts them down a mana, technically. Alright, Imperial Siege costs 1 because Performance's 2nd chapter makes the 2nd spell cost 1 less. So yeah, 3rd chapter Performance goes off, and now Oshni gets to recast and copy a spell from the graveyard. And they're going to copy Journey, which, yeah, I guess makes sense, but the problem is the Amaret's still there, and like, you have to deal with this thing eventually. But I guess Oshni is just hoping to find stuff off the Journey so that can help them deal with Amaret. Molten Incubation doesn't actually hit Planeswalkers though, so probably just hatching it into a dragon if Oshni manages to get 5 counters onto it. Their first journey finds a land, and their second journey finds Mystery Craft, which isn't very good on its own. So yeah, I feel like Oshni copying a journey might have been a mistake. Probably not though. I mean, because if they manage to hit a performance off the journey, then suddenly they're... Well, no, if they hit the performance off the journey, then they get to flip another card, but then they don't really have anything to trigger this following chapters of the performance, so yeah. Instead, Oshni plays Mystery the Craft, and now they're empty-handed yet again. Or not empty-handed, but they have no spells in hand, which is basically about as bad as being empty-handed when you're playing a deck that's so reliant on casting a bunch of spells. Wizzerinus draws Embodied, so +1's Amaret, so now it's at 6 loyalty, and Wizzerinus swings at Oshni with a 2/2 and 2 1/1s. Is Oshni going to trade the alien token off? No, they're just going to take. If they're still holding on to some slim chance of flipping the mystery. I feel like any else that Oshni has probably begins with top decking EHS and then hitting some good stuff from the EHS. Wizzerinus plays down the ring and fetches Xanagan off of it. And yeah, they play Nebula. I guess they're probably going to drop Embodied so, because why not? It's even more threats for Oshni to deal with. So can Oshni top deck Performance or EHS here? And yeah, they managed to top deck EHS, so that's one step to coming back into the game. So let's see what they hit off EHS then. Actually, right, because EHS will let you cast 2 more spells, which will get 5 counters onto Molten Incubation, which will make it go off, and Oshni can blow up Molten Incubation to kill all Wizzerinus' creatures. It doesn't deal with Amaret, unfortunately, and doesn't deal with Embodied Soul, but good enough for now. And Oshni can probably stack it in a way so that Molten Incubation blows up before Mystery transforms, in case Oshni hits an instant off EHS. But yeah, so EHS, let's see what Oshni finds. Okay, seems like they flipped 2 Solar Flares, and yeah, that kills Amaret pretty nicely. and it'll put the 5th counter onto Molten Incubation, which blows up the board, because like a 5/5 dragon does only help them here. So Molten Incubation blows up the board, and then after that, Mystery flips into Epsilon. Oh wait, no, never mind. Right, Mystery doesn't actually use triggers, it's state-based action. So it's gonna flip before Molten Incubation blows up. And wait, that actually does work out really well too, then, because now Oshni can sacrifice Epsilon plus the red alien to copy one of the solar flares. So is Oshni going to realize that they can sacrifice Epsilon plus the red alien to copy the solar? No, they don't realize that. Well, I mean, it's not too bad because at least they got 2 solar flares off that, but like they could have the equivalent of basically a Thunder Roads there. And like, yeah, they had the exact amount of mana and the exact number of aliens to sacrifice to perfectly copy the solar flare. But now Oshni is at 8 mana next turn, and they can just coalesce the EHS, and like, unless Wizzerinus finds Grave Hate, that's just going to happen next turn, and like, that's something Wizzerinus has to worry about. But Zerian can probably find Grave Hate. Is there any legends in Wizzerinus deck that does Grave Hate stuff? Actually, no, not really. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so I don't think Wizzerinus has a way to prevent Oshni from coalescing EHS next turn. Xanagan can whack Oshni in the face for 2, but... Oh, and Embodied Soul too. So Oshni is getting beaten down by some creatures that are coming down. Wizzerinus is just going to give Embodied Soul lifelink. Just for trying to gain out range of Oshni's burn spells. So Oshni sacrifices Timber Range. Let's see what they draw for a turn. Performance. Well, that's a good card, but they're probably just going to coalesce EHS now because that's the most impactful thing to do right now. And they'd rather just coalesce it out of the graveyard before Wizzerinus finds Grave Hate for it. So yeah, EHS comes back, and let's see what Oshni flips this time. Oshni is probably looking for some way to deal with Xanagan. So maybe 2 more Solar Flares? No, that's not possible. Well, Void Flares also work, I guess. And they flip Breach Lily flips Performance. So actually not that bad of a combination. And unfortunately, Performance isn't going to trigger because Oshni has already cast their second spell of the turn, which is the spell that they flipped off EHS. But yeah, they get Solar Flare, which they can use to, I guess, kill the Soldier token, because like, I mean, they can also use it to whack the Xanagan, but doesn't deal with the Soldier token. And they're going to use it to whack the Xanagan. And then Performance flips. Let's see what it flips. It flips a land. Well, that's a land play for next turn. So that's not bad. And if Oshni top deck a spell next turn, then they can play Performance and then the spell and get the second chapter trigger on the performance, or both performances. Or I guess no, the second performance can just flip into a spell, and they'll also get Oshni their second trigger. So Wizzerinus plays the ring, probably looking for something to deal with Oshni's board. They still have Lucian in the deck, so I guess they're probably looking for Lucian or Azan. Yeah, that also works. And it's also cheaper. So Azan deals with EHS, the creature, and then Wizzerinus swings in with their creatures, and Oshni's under a lot of pressure yet again. But I think Oshni has done pretty well to just try to claw back into this game, because just a few turns ago, or even just 2 turns ago, they've been on the verge of dying to Wizzerinus' creatures. And I mean, Oshni is still in a similar position now, but at least they've cast way more spells since then. So Xanagan is going to +2 and whack Oshni in the face again. Xanagan has 2 emblems now, so there's 2 instances of Exalted, and Bite, so swinging in for 4. So yeah, Oshni needs to find something to prevent lethal yet again, but maybe they find it this time too. Maybe another EHS would be in order. Imperial Siege, yeah, a bit too late for that. I think Oshni is probably just going to play their performance from hand and see what they can hit. They need to hit EHS off the second performance or else they die, because Solar Flare doesn't really save them here. Oof, Wayfarer Shrine, yeah, that's not what they need. And I think they just lose the game. So a bit unfortunate. That turn where Oshni could have copied their Solar Flare with the Epsilon before it died to Molten Incubation. Turns out it didn't really matter after all, because all that would happen if Oshni made that play was that they'll be at 8 life, which would have been lethal. It would have been Exacties, I think. Yeah, so there was no way for Oshni to win that game, but they definitely tried really hard, and they've made Wizzerinus fight tooth and nail for the victory. Or never mind, Planeswalkers, right. Oshni was dead either ways. But yeah, surprisingly close game for how the game turned out. And Wizzerinus wins 2-0 over Oshni.